Zevachim, page 36b. Top of the page with the words V'hatanya. V'hatanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yav Chadash Shachal B'doi, Michayav Zamanoimam, L'Tizbach Hashem L'Kech HaShav V'Severo, Kol Devara, Al Devar Ra, Atam Chayvo, V'i Atam Chayvo, Ad Chatat, Shishachata B'doi, Terei Tanoya Li B'Dav Yehuda. But isn't it taught in a Braita that Rabbi Yehuda says, one might have thought that with regard to a sin offering, that one slaughtered in the south, he would be liable for it. Therefore, the verse states, you shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep that has a blemish or even any evil thing. Deuteronomy 17, verse 1. To teach that for slaughtering an evil thing, such as a blemished offering, you deem him liable to receive lashes, but you do not deem him liable for a sin offering that he slaughtered in the south. The Gemara answers here too, there are two Tanaim, and they disagree with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Abba, Moed Rabbi Yehuda shechoizo, and Rabbi Abba says, although Rabbi Yehuda says that an offering is rendered not valid if it was slaughtered with the intent that its blood would be left over until the next day, Rabbi Yehuda concedes that if the priest subsequently collected, conveyed, or presented the blood with the intent to sacrifice or partake of the offering beyond its designated time, then he establishes the offering as pigul. The intent to leave it overnight does not prevent it from being rendered pigul, in contrast to intent to sacrifice or partake of it outside its designated area, or performing a sacrificial rite of the paschal offering, or a sin offering, not for its own sake, which do prevent the offering from subsequently being rendered pigul. C 29b. Rava says, no, that this is so, as intent to sprinkle the blood the next day, which renders an offering pigul, and which inherently includes the intent to leave the blood over until the next day so that he can then sprinkle it, is nothing before the sprinkling of the blood. And his intent during the slaughter to sprinkle the blood the next day does not render the offering pigul until the blood is sprinkled, and then the sprinkling of the blood comes and establishes the offering as pigul. Clearly, the intent to leave the blood over until the next day does not prevent the offering from subsequently being rendered pigul. The Gemara rejects Rava's proof, but it is not so that this is a valid proof, as there, with regard to standard pigul intent, it is one intent that is established with the sprinkling of the blood. By contrast, here, where he initially had intent to leave the blood until the next day, and subsequently had intent to sprinkle it beyond its designated time, there are two separate intents. Therefore, since an improper intent already exists, the offering cannot thereafter be rendered pigul. Rav Huna raised an objection to Rabbi Abba from a Braita. If one slaughtered an offering with the intent to place the blood that is to be placed above the red line, below the red line, or to place the blood that is to be placed below the red line above the red line, and he had intent to do so immediately, meaning on the same day, then it is valid, as such intent does not disqualify the offering. If he had intent to sacrifice the offering outside its designated area, it is disqualified, but there is no liability to receive karet for it. If he had intent to sacrifice it beyond its designated time, then it is rendered pigul, and one is liable to receive karet for it. Lemachal pasul chaza v'chishev ben Chutz izmanoi ben chutz limkoimoi. Pasuk ein boikais. Tiyufta yavet tiyufta. The Braita continues. If one had intent to place the blood, that is to be placed above the red line, below the red line, or vice versa, the next day, then it is disqualified due to his intent to leave it overnight. In accordance with his statement, Rabbi Yehuda, in this case, if he then had intent to sacrifice the same offering either beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, it is disqualified, and there is no liability to receive karet for it. Evidently, intent to leave it overnight prevents the offering from subsequently being rendered pigul. The Gemara concludes the refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Abba is indeed a conclusive refutation. Amar Rav Chizda Ravina bar Seila Chishev Shiochluhu Tmeim Lemachal Chad Amar Rabbi Tida Devaso Lefnei Zrika V'lo Chazeh Ki V'chashev Ben Mepsi. Rav Chizda says that Ravina bar Seila says if one slaughtered an offering with intent that impure individuals would eat the meat of the offering the next day, one is liable to receive karet due to the prohibition of pigul, although impure individuals are not fit to partake of the meat. This is nevertheless considered intent to partake of it beyond its designated time. Rava says no, that this is so, as meat prior to sprinkling of the blood is not fit to be eaten, and when one has improper intent with regard to it is disqualified. Clearly, intent to partake of a forbidden item beyond its designated time renders the offering pigul. The Gemara rejects Rava's proof, but it is not so, as there with regard to standard pigul intent, he sprinkles the blood and the meat is rendered fit to be eaten the next day. By contrast here, it is not rendered fit to be eaten by impure individuals at all. Therefore, such intent is not considered significant intent to consume the meat after its designated time. Amar Rav Chizda Margila Bipume Terav Dimi Barchinina Besar Pesach Shelo Hutzla Velachme Toda Shelo Hurmu Chayavin Aleim Mishum Tuma. Rav Chizda says that Rav Dimi Barchinina was wont to say the following halacha with regard to the meat of a paschal offering that was not roasted and the loaves of a thanks offering from which the priest's portion was not separated. Although it is prohibited for them to be eaten, nevertheless, one is liable to receive karet due to violating the prohibition against eating them in a state of impurity. It says, although it is prohibited for them to be eaten, if you eat them, then you get kares. What does it have to do with although it's prohibited? It's prohibited, and I don't understand why although it's prohibited. Rava said no, that this is so, as it is Tana Braita. The verse states, but the soul who eats of the flesh of the sacrifice of peace offerings that pertain to the Lord, having his impurity upon him, that soul shall be cut off from his people. Leviticus 7:20. The added words that pertain to the Lord serve to include the sacrificial portions of offerings of lesser sanctity with regard to impurity, teaching that one who partakes of them while impure is liable to receive karet. Alma, apparently, what we see, even though they are not fit for consumption, one is liable to receive karet due to violating the prohibition against eating them in ritual impurity. Here too, with regard to the meat of paschal offering that was not roasted, and the loaves of a thanks offering from which the priest's portion was not separated, even though they are not fit to be eaten, one is liable, again, even though they're not fit to be eaten. Just says they're not fit to be eaten, and one is liable to, what do you mean, even though they're not fit to be eaten, one is liable to receive karet. If they are not fit to be eaten, then one may receive karet. Why is it even though? It doesn't seem to follow what they're building up to. I don't understand why it's saying that, but okay. One is liable to receive karet due to violating the prohibition against eating them in impurity. Even though he's not allowed to go there, if you go there, he'll get punished. It's like saying, even though he's not going in that room, even though it's forbidden to go in that room, if he goes in that room, he'll get a punishment. That doesn't follow. It doesn't make sense. Even though he's not allowed to go there, if he goes there, it won't be good. That's what it's saying here. That's what at least it's reading. Anyway, okay. ולא היא הסמן מוריקה שמקדם חזו לגבוה לפוקי בסר בסך חוץ לא מלאך מתוידה שלחורבו דלא חזו ולא גבוה ולא העליון. The more rejection is proof, but it is not so. As there, the sacrificial portions of offerings of lesser sanctity that are burned on the altar are at least fit for the Most High, meaning that for consumption on the altar, and therefore one is liable to receive karet for eating them while ritually impure. This is to the exclusion of the meat of a paschal offering that was not roasted, and the loaves of a thanks offering from which the priest's portion was not separated, which are not fit at all, not for the Most High, and not for an ordinary person. Lishnach lena, lishnach lena, lishnach lena. Okay, the Gemara presents another version of the proof and its rejection. But the sacrificial portions are not fit, and yet one is liable if he consumes them while impure. The Gemara responds, but it is not so, since the sacrificial portions are fit for their matters, and these, meaning the meat of the paschal offering that was not roasted, and the loaves of the thanks offering, from which the priest's portion was not separated, are not fit at all. Hadron Allah kol hapsulin. We shall return to you, God willing, kol hapsulin. This concludes this chapter, and we start a new chapter. The Mishnah, Beishamai oimrim, kol anitonin lemizbeach al hachitzon, shenazim b'matana achas kiper, uvechatel shti matanos. Beishamai say, with regard to all the offerings whose blood is to be placed on the external altar, even those that require the blood to be sprinkled on two opposite corners of the altar, so that it will run down each of its four sides. In a case where the priest placed the blood on the altar with only one placement, he facilitated atonement. And in the case of a sin offering, which requires four placements, one on each of the four corners of the altar, at least two placements are necessary to facilitate atonement. And Beit Hillel say, even with regard to a sin offering, in a case where the priest placed the blood with one placement, he facilitated atonement after the fact. Lefikach, im natan et harishona katikna, therefore, since the priest facilitates atonement with one placement in all cases other than a sin offering according to Beit Shammai, and even in a case of a sin offering according to Beit Hillel, if he placed the first placement in its proper manner, and the second with the intent to eat the offering beyond its designated time, he facilitated atonement. Since the second placement is not indispensable with regard to achieving atonement, improper intent while performing that rite does not invalidate the offering. And based on the same reasoning, if he placed the first placement with the intent to eat the offering beyond its designated time, and he placed the second placement with the intent to eat the offering outside its designated area, the second of which does not render an offering pigul, the offering is pigul, an offering disqualified by improper intention, and one is liable to receive excision from the world to come, which is correct for its consumption. This is because the intent that accompanied the second placement does not supersede the pigul status of the offering. Kol hanitonin lemizbeach manimi she'im rizachas bin hamatonos ki'ilu lo kiper. Lefikach nasan gulen ketiknan v'achas lo ketikna pasula v'em bokares. All this applies to those offerings whose blood is to be placed on the external altar. But with regard to all the offerings whose blood is to be placed on the inner altar, if the priest omitted even one of the placements, it is as though he did not facilitate atonement. Therefore, if he placed all the placements in their proper manner, and one placement in an improper manner, meaning with the intent to eat the offering beyond its designated time, the offering is disqualified, as it is lacking one placement, but there is no liability for karet for one who partakes of the offering, as the improper intention related to only part of the blood that renders the offering permitted for consumption, and that offering becomes pigul only when the improper intention relates to the entire portion of the offering that renders it permitted for consumption. That's the Mishnah, and now we go to the Talmud. Tanu Rabbanan, minayin enitonin mizbeach hachitzon shinat tanan b'matana achashiki be'al toloma v'dam zvachecha yishafech v'ha ilahachihu tiasai ha'mi boyer lechazitanya. The sages taught in the Brisa, from where is it derived with regard to those offerings whose blood is placed on the external altar, that if the priest placed the blood with one placement, he facilitated atonement? The verse states, "And the blood of your offerings shall be poured upon the altar of the Lord your God," Deuteronomy 12:27, indicating that a single pouring of blood suffices. The Gemara asks, but does this verse come to teach this halacha? That verse is necessary for that which is taught in another Brita discussing a different matter.